Okay, so good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, June 22nd, 2020. The time is 9:01 a.m. This is a special meeting of our Airport and Airport Advisory Board, and it is an update. Attending are Commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Filios. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we have two business items, potential action. The first one, review of Airport Advisory Board meeting. Stephen, or will it be Joan?
It'll be me for some of it, and actually it'll be Corey Sigfer with TO for kind of going over this item that's in your packet.
Yes.
What we want to do is go through this to, one, brief you as the commissioner, the same briefing that the advisory board got, because this is the runway decoupling project.
Go ahead.
This is actually going to be one of the biggest projects and most difficult projects this airport's ever had in the last probably 20 years, because it's the most complicated phasing project, because we will be taking runways down, we'll be closing the entire airport for periods of time for construction. So it's going to be very challenging for the next couple of years. We'll be shortening runways too. So it's good to understand from you as the board what the next couple of years when we actually start this project, what that ramification means for you. When people talk to you about this, of why can't I bring my airplane in here, why are we doing this, that you understand what that means. This will not be the last briefing we have about this. This will not be the last public meeting we hold about this. We just want this as an initial phase of saying this is what the plan is, this is where we sit today, because we are just designing this project right now. So now I'm going to hand it over to Corey, and she'll run through this the packet right now with you. You should all have it. If you have questions, please ask.
Yeah, the slides that we had at the meeting the other day.
Thank you, Corey.
Go through it real quick with you. So basically, this project is kicking off the design phase. You have a grant for the design phase, or you should be receiving a grant. You've done a grant application for this already. It's AIP 48, and it's packaged with your Taxiway D North construction portion. So the kickoff to this is we've just begun the design. I'll go through the work scope briefly. We're shortening runway 20 to separate it from, physically separate it from runway 24. That's a nationwide safety issue. So the safety areas of the two runways, which is outside the pavement, have to be completely separated. So right now they're overlapping and the pavements are overlapping. And with this project, we're separating the pavements and then also separating the safety areas. That involves shortening the runway by 958 feet. And it'll leave, we're going to keep a blast pad on the end of runway 20 because it's currently good pavement, and we're going to retain that, but we have to physically separate probably around 400, or remove about 400 feet of pavement. And this also involves a lot of electrical changes. Moving the PAPI, which is an approach slope, has to be moved forward on runway 20, and then some of the runway lighting needs to be adjusted on runway 20. And then the connecting taxiways at the ends of the runways now go in and access that intersecting end. And in the future, we'll have to have separate taxiways that, when they're separated, that access each of the new completed ends. And as a part of this, when we're adjusting the electrical, the airport now has two electrical vault buildings. One is a newer one on the north side, kind of up by Empire Airlines, and then there's an existing really old cinder block building that teeny tiny, and it was kind of a patch that to keep it, but it's really falling apart, and this building needs to be combined either in the newer runway 624 building, or there's some options we're looking at, or relocating it to a central place in the infield of the two runways. So kind of it's going to be an alternatives analysis that we'll end up doing. We had an electrical engineer come out last week, and he is doing some checking over of the electrical system and doing kind of options for the airport and advisory board for what he believes or what they think would be the best for this airport in the future and moving forward. As a part of the decoupling project. The FAA has a new signing convention and taxiway naming convention. So currently, the airport has had the same taxiway naming probably since the 70s. Taxiway Alpha runs along Runway 220. So another part of the alternatives and beginning when we start this phasing is to do a taxiway renaming and do some alternatives for that. We can do it completely with the FAA naming criteria, which might really confuse the pilots because it would take things that have been called certain things and put them on opposite sides of the airport. If you move to slide, let's see here, conceptual taxiway designations, it just basically mixes up the airport. So we're going to do two different alternatives, one that kind of goes with the FAA's general overall idea, but keeps a lot of the historical names the same. And then we're going to do another alternative that shows completely renaming things with the FAA's criteria, and then review it and try to get comments from the community and the pilots and buy off from the FAA to see what the most logical, because we don't want any confusion or any safety issues due to renaming all the taxiways.
And I'll be honest, this will be the most complaints you get, period. The shortening of the runway will get some complaints on. In fact, we've already gotten some conversations with some pilots, but once they understand what the reasoning is, they generally accept it. However, the naming conventions for the taxiways will be the longest lasting complaints that we get because of how it gets set up and because of how long things have been named. And if you talk to the FAA, where we have Alpha today is where Resort is. If you talk to the FAA, it actually should be where Empire is. So if you actually make that change, you could technically have some people say that they're on Alpha, but you'll have people confused and say which Alpha. So we'll have issues if we go follow the full naming convention, which is why Corey talked about. We don't plan on following the full naming convention that the FAA sets out in mandates, because that will cause mass confusion and we will have a lot of complaints from that. So just, that's realistically where I see the most complaints coming.
So we're going to try to find a happy medium that stays hopefully more locally centered rather than completely going over to the FAA. Hopefully they won't force us to go all the way over to the FAA naming convention. But
Who ultimately makes that decision? Don't tell me we do.
It's a little bit of a negotiation between us and the FAA, because it's the airports division, certification branch, and airport. Basically, we all sit down and we put what we feel it should be, and then we sit down and basically negotiate what the best alternative is. Certification's always gonna say, well, we say it's this. Airports is kind of usually this third independent party that says, well, we understand that both parties want this, and you usually end up somewhere in the middle. It's never a perfect alternative that all are happy, is usually what I've seen. Because I keep throwing out there, and if we're gonna go rename everything, then I wanna start at the bottom. I wanna start at Zulu and make it where nothing is the same anymore.
Right,
And then that way everybody has to
okay.
relearn.
yeah.
To avoid confusion.
instead of naming something
Some and-
Taxiway
and-
Alpha and then moving Taxiway
Right.
Alpha to another side, so the old guy that's been here forever is still calling this one Alpha, and the guy that flew in, well, this one's Alpha, and they're confused, and they end up,
Right.
So ultimately, FAA must approve?
Yes,
Okay.
it's part of our signage and naming plans. And the FAA has to approve it, but as I said, it's a negotiation between us. So you as a board does not approve it, other than that's part of our ALP, but that doesn't truly show up there.
Okay.
Are you going to start having, I mean, it sounds like you've already had some renaming conversations. Is this going to be a bigger,
It will be, we need to talk to the certification branch of the FAA, make sure that they have at least some buy-in of what the plan is. We'll probably have 2 or 3 examples that certification says we will okay or be marginally okay with before we'll start getting public outreach. And there may be actually 2 or 3 iterations of this where we say, here's our next 5 years, and here's the ultimate plan in the next 20 years to say, as we make more changes to the airfield, this is our goal in 20 years to be the full naming convention of this. But we're living with this on this for the short term.
Yeah, go right ahead, Corey.
Okay, so the renaming is one issue. If you look at the work scope 1, under miscellaneous tasks, on the ALP, there were certain things that were identified as a part of the decoupling. One would be to remove the midfield connectors and move them to the outer third, which is a safety, another safety issue. And this also helps this project if we remove the taxiway D connector and put it outside the middle third, then it allows access when you have to close part of the runway and you're actually doing the physical decoupling. You can displace the threshold on the runway 24 and leave yourself a little bit of runway, but you can still access that end without having to back taxi. So I think that will probably be the first phase in the overall construction, would be to remove the taxiway delta connector on the north side and then construct the new one outside the middle third, and then we could get into the actual decoupling as like phase 2 or phase 3 as a part of that actual project.
And we are looking at probably at least 2 years of construction, maybe as many as 3, depending on what the FA funds. But then we will actually, as soon as we get done with this project, the plan is actually to do the main taxiway next to Resort, which is Alpha today. So we will have 3 significant years of construction projects that will do significant disruptions to the airport.
When do you anticipate beginning?
2022.
Okay.
So the grants that the FAA has budgeted currently is 2022 is a smaller, I think it was a $900,000. And then the second one was 2022, they have, or 23, they have 2.2 million slated for the airport for construction. So hopefully that all can be packaged together in one project over the course of 2 years, and funding with 2 years. But we're kind of in the planning part, so we're not exactly sure how that's going to flesh out at this point. But then with part of the miscellaneous, it's when we decouple, we'll have to regrade the safety areas off the end of runway 20, adjust the drainage and grading in that area, and then do a little bit of airfield road, interior road modifications. So for schedule, we've submitted the grant application, or you guys did, about the beginning of this year. The professional services agreement has been signed in March of this year, and we're just kicking off the planning and study phase for completion around the beginning of, around September of this year, and that kind of lays out the roadmap for the rest of the design, which would happen over the next full year, and we plan to be done with design and ready to bid in December to January of 2021-22, so that we could have a grant application that you guys could apply for in January of 2022. So you get it funded hopefully in June of 2022 and begin construction sometime that summer. So we talked briefly about safety and phasing. We're hoping to have one runway open always at one time, at all times. So either the smaller runway could be open, so it would be less, traffic that could be able to use the airport due to the bigger jets. But we're planning to have to be able to accommodate all of the little guys and smaller jets. And then once we get that taxiway, as we talked about, constructed, we're hoping to displace the threshold on the bigger runway and still leave about, I think it was 5,500 feet of length available, which accommodates quite a few of your traffic, maybe other than maybe like the Forest Service or the biggest jets that are completely full. There might be very few periods of time where you'd have to have it shut for maybe over a night or something where they'd have to do striping and marking where it impacts both areas too much and it's for safety, they'd have to shut it. But we're planning to try and keep it open if we can. So the funding for this project, the design is funded under the CARES Act, which is no local or state match. And then the construction was budgeted under 2022-23, and it's probably going to be the same sort of typical grant where it's the 90% federal, 10% local state split. But we never know, right? And that is all I had, so.
Okay, questions for Corey? Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, that was good. All right, so where are we? Go right ahead, Stephen.
The next item we had was just the advisory board guidelines. I was just mentioning to the advisory board that they were approved, so nothing really big there happened. The annual fee was just the mentioning to the advisory board what we discussed previously with the board, with you as the board, of adding those 2 additional fee items to more transient traffic for the airport use fee and then also the car rental fee, which also we have now scheduled the public hearing, are working on scheduling that public hearing, so you will see that added. And as a reminder, we have the sewer rate fee increase on there, and it is realistically, as I discussed previously, this is a stopgap year. Next year, we will be more implementing the actual true sewer rate fees, because we did not do a true study that we needed to do to actually determine what our true costs should be to actually replace that system that you're supposed to under state law. But this is a stopgap year because we didn't have time to do it for everything. So, and then the other 2 fees that we did, and we only raised rates roughly 2%, if I remember correctly, for CPI. So it's very minimal true rate increases. For the COVID effect, this was put on there because we're actually going to be doing
Sorry, I have a few questions.
Yep.
So when you go to charge an airport user fee, what specifically does that fee go towards?
The plan is to split it between 2 categories. One is to put it into our operating budget, so it pays for operating, and then to split half of it into a capital fund,
Okay.
so that we can pay for basically equipment that we need on the field.
Right.
Larger projects, things like that. The FAA doesn't fund.
Right, so that's the justification for being able to comply with Idaho code that says you can't charge more than it costs to do the, service.
Yep.
So, okay,
Because right now, we don't truly make, we don't charge anything for that. We don't make enough money to actually cover our costs today anyways.
Right.
And this,
yeah. This is a step in that direction.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, keep going.
For the COVID effect, if Joan?
Yeah, I had asked for this to be put on the agenda this last time because there's a lot of downside to COVID and how it affects the aerospace industry as a whole. So at our next meeting, Tim Combrick, along with staff, will be doing a presentation about what they think the impact is going to be for our local area as well as nationally.
And I can tell you, because I spoke with Ryan Sheehan, who is the Ops and Maintenance Director over at Spokane. Basically, their passenger counts have been doubling every day, every 10 days. But they were down to about 8 to 10 people per day. So when you're doubling that, it takes a long time to double to any meaningful numbers.
Right.
So I think he said, if I remember correctly, he said in March they had 8,000 people, and in February they had 150,000 people.
Wow.
It'll be an interesting presentation.
The public hearing, is that going to be separate or part of our business meeting?
It depends on, we had planned to have it as part of a business meeting, but if you want to change it, we can.
Okay, at this point, I don't hear of any public outcry.
I don't either.
And that was part of the reason too, is we hadn't heard any public outcry. As part of the advisory board, we've had 3 people there.
So they've already seen this
The
schedule?
advisory board has.
Yeah, okay.
And it was on Zoom, so if anyone bothered to tune in, they saw it.
Well, even before that, we had
Right, we did.
3 people there. So, we discussed it last week in the Zoom meeting too, so.
Are you talking about the fee structure?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it would seem to me you can just include it in the business meeting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
community outreach, I was not thinking this was I am thinking this is not a good year to do our normal community outreach in terms of something out of the field. Pose a question to the advisory board, do you think should put what I call a dog and pony show together and go to the chambers and that kind of thing, but everyone felt that we should push that off until next year, so that's.
Okay, all right.
And there's no Air Expo this year.
No, not this year.
Okay.
We have been in contact with Commemorative Air Force. We are in discussions about them bringing up a B-24 this year, but they haven't responded with the execution of the document to bring that up. And I don't know when they're gonna, if they are or not.
Small chance something could happen.
Small chance something, but it's not, we aren't planning a full-scale event
Sure.
because we didn't know what was gonna happen.
Right.
And can't plan on not knowing things.
Fair enough.
But the plan is to have, if we can have something, they'll have something, but them as an organization, basically, they have done nothing all year, from what I understand, just because you can't.
Right.
So.
Okay.
For airport access changes, as we talked about before, we were planning on implementing May 1st airport access card entry access for all of our gates. Because of COVID-19, that went to the wayside. We're actually re-implementing it as of October 1st. So we're re-implementing that stage. So if you hear anybody ask, that's what we're doing. It's no charge for anybody as long as they're a tenant. It's just that it's a prox card instead of basically a garage door to get into our gates, because we have found that we have excess of a couple hundred garage door, or these door openers for our gates that we don't know who they belong to. We'll have contractors show up that we have no idea how they got them. People have gate codes to our airport that we have contractors for Vista will just randomly show up and we'll go, how did you get out here? And they'll go, well, we know the code. So
Like the sandwich vendors and.
they just, yeah, that's actually why we're going to talk about the Cessna fence project. Is we've had Jimmy John's actually we found driving on our taxiway.
Oh,
So that
What was that?
that's part of the reason why we're the last other item that we were going to discuss too. We have a significant issues with security at the airport, and it's been very lax for many years, and it should have been addressed a long time ago. Luckily, the system that we're installing, realistically, we've spent about $7,000–8,000. We priced that same system out to have it professionally installed, about $1 to $2 million. So by my staff doing this and the knowledge that they've got in the system we found, we saved a lot of money, so.
good.
Budget was just a quick conversation with the advisory board about the budget process, where we are in it, nothing big. For FAA grants, this is why we have this little picture of what this is in there. It's just a conversation about this year's grants that we have going on. And we have 2 grants, actually technically 3 grants going on right now. First one is the one we've already kind of talked about, the design project for the decoupling, but then it's also what is kind of known as the D-North project for the hangars on the north side. That grant is somewhere around, was it 1.9 million, correct, Corey? Was it 1.6? 1.6, I think it's $1.6 million off the top of my head. That is completely 100% funded by the FAA, so we have no cost in that one.
Good.
The third grant, or second grant, excuse me, is the CARES Act grant, which is $69,000. That grant has been funded, or is in the process of being funded. Our signatures are done with it, so it has been sent back to the FAA. We're waiting to get through the system so we can actually start funding money out of it. The third grant that we do not know if we'll get money yet, but the FAA has made comments that we should get funded with it is actually the fence grant. They would typically, they do not go that far along, allowing us to bid and do those type of things unless they plan on funding it. And that's right around 600,000 if I remember correct. So this year alone, we're about $2.2 million just in federal grants. And all that money this year is 100% funded by the FAA. So we have no money outlaid this year at all. And for the fence project, this will completely fence, well, almost completely fence the entire airport. It'll actually be from near the Harbs area, all the way around to Hutter, and all the way to the north side to where basically Ramsey North is today. It's approximately 20,000 linear feet of fencing. So it's a very long fence, but it will be a very odd fence, I will say that, because it is 10 foot tall with one strand barbed wire, and it is a wildlife fence. It's not a standard chain link fence.
Right.
4 miles, almost 4 miles of fencing.
That's it we had no comments from the Airport Association and no old business. So, any questions on the advisory board?
No, sounds good. So public comment.
Actually, we got part two.
Part
number
two, the Cessna fence.
Oh, which is apart from the fencing you just described?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
So as I talked about a little bit earlier, we do have some major issues with access control. And I tried very hard to get this included with the FAA grant money for the fence project. Unfortunately, the FAA viewed this as they would not install fencing on already developed area that is not on the perimeter. So they would not agree to install this fencing that is shown. And this image is for illustration only. This is not where we would install a fence line. But we actually, the airport went out and talked to the people that actually bid on the fence project, and these are the numbers that we got back. These actually are the lowest numbers the airport has ever gotten for this fence project. So they've actually gone out and bid this about 3 or 4 times. Previously, they were about $100,000 to get this done. The lowest I think they ever said, when I talked with my staff, was 80. Right now, the lowest we have is 25,000. What I'm asking, and I'd put on a business meeting later, but what I'd like to do is use airport funds to actually fund this fence project this year, because I know it got this low because they already have the work, or plan to have the work to do it at a later date. And this would solve a lot of our issues to actually fence this entire Cessna.
Why does, I think the less expensive one has sliders included? And, I couldn't understand that.
So we actually add that as an option because we need to put 2 slide gates in at where the museum is, so we can have access there. And the first one is actually we actually need, the price for that needs to be doubled. It has 2 posts, the other one has 4 posts. So it actually needs to be doubled for the first one, because we need 2 gates on each side of that area. So just to allow access on either side. And we would actually just have the posts. We actually have gates as an airport, so we can easily install them. We just need to do something because, as I told you, we actually see semis drive through this area out onto our taxiways. We found delivery drivers for food. This is one of our major hotspot areas that the FAA is continuously harping on us that we need to address and fix, but they will not address it for us.
How much fencing's involved?
About 1,800 linear feet.
What is the downside?
The downside is that the tenants won't be able to access directly from on either side of their hangars, which is why we're providing the option of the gates for them to install. The plan is that we would not install the gates, but if the tenants wish to, they could. So it would be, it's part of the reason why we asked for that pricing as well. And realistically, we've priced individual gates of those sizes. They're about half of what you typically would see for those pricing too. So it's a very reasonable quote for each of those pricing for the gates. The downside would be, I can't think of much downside to have it. It makes it much more secure for the airport, but also for the personal property, because this gate is open all the time. If anybody has an aircraft sitting outside and somebody wanders through and then does damage, that we do take some liability risk. In fact, we do have multiple people that have reported hangar damage due to people driving through this airport. And actually, there's an advisory board member that had his hangar damaged from somebody running into it with a boat,
With a boat.
when he was backing up with a boat.
So have all of the affected hangar members been notified?
I wanted to have a discussion with you of whether you as the board would support this first, and then the intent is, if there is support from the board, we would send out a letter advising that we plan to move forward with this, and the plan is to install this later this fall. We need to know where you would like to locate this. We'll mark out on your yard with paint where we plan to. If there's an issue with this location, please advise us. Please let us know if you'd want to install a gate in these two sizes, that this is the price for these two gates if you either or, and basically go down that path with them. And it'd be only these people that own that area as well. So.
And then I know the red line is obviously not where you're going to have the gates, but is it, do they stop in between each building?
Yeah, the fence would only be between each building.
Gotcha, okay.
I just didn't have
Yeah, a way to do that.
a great way to do that.
And you're thinking 2 access points, is that it, 2 gates?
There'd be 2 gates, 2 airport could own gates basically between the 2 hangars where the museum is, between those 2 hangars.
Right, yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Because those are not truly leased by anybody, and we need to be able to access and move snow between them. There may be, each individual hangar may choose to install a gate in between. And then we would actually add a lock onto it as part of the pricing of it. They'd be an airport-controlled lock. They're owned by the airport. They'd get about 5 keys with them, so they can have as many keys as they want. But each lock would actually be specifically controlled by that one key. So that you couldn't have, each hangar would have their own separate keys. They couldn't unlock any of them independently. So it's more of a controlled system instead of where we have today, anybody has their own lock. So we're trying to take a better control of all of our fence line. So we have some people that think that they own their gates, and then realistically, they're our fence line, so we own them. We're trying to get a better control and grasp of who actually has control.
And so the gates would be on them?
The gate's price to be installed
Price would be on them,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm fine with going forward with it. I can't really approve it until I see everything that's, here from the community and the owners, so. But otherwise, it seems reasonable.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
I mean, we're providing access if they need additional access. It logically should be on them. So now, once they get access, help me understand this. Somebody installs a gate, and they have access. And there are a number of keys that other people can also gain access. In essence, they do have access to the entire field, don't they?
Well, they will have access with their gate. They'll still have access to the back of their hangar. We're not taking away the access through.
Right.
It's just access through their grass area, that's all it is.
In between the buildings.
In between.
Between the buildings,
It's
right.
basically for mowing and walking through. That's all it's really meant for, because
Right.
it's not large enough to drive a vehicle through.
Oh, I see, okay, all right.
That's the
Okay.
idea is, the 6 foot is actually about 58 inches. It's not quite 6 feet. It's just they call it a 6-foot gate.
Right.
Okay, understood.
Right now, people don't park their cars and stuff in between. They're not supposed to.
Now, we have a couple that do, but we've been pushing, because we're getting pushed from the FAA, that you can park inside your hangar, you can park behind your hangar.
Right.
The sides are not meant for it. They're not meant for your storage areas.
Right.
If you want to do that, you have to pay different pricing rates for this.
Okay.
And a lot of people have cleaned it up because they want their hangars to be nice.
Right. Okay.
Fair enough.
So we'll start sending letters out since it seems the board's amenable, and we'll start moving forward in that direction.
Okay. Any other questions on the Cessna fencing?
Just about Alaska, any more talks?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Okay.
Nope. They seem to send a question to Empire about once a quarter and then nothing for a while. So I've talked to them a few times too, and then they just kind of vanish. So as soon as I find out, I'll let you know.
Well, and they're revamping,
And it's,
the schedules are filling up again, so I would assume they're probably not going to want to store as many aircraft.
you're seeing definitely increase in traffic. It's just that if you have another outbreak, you're gonna dive again, and air traffic is completely gonna be driven on confidence. If you have confidence wanes again, you're not gonna have it, and it depends on how long the airlines are gonna agree to have their middle seat open. As soon as, because really you're only at 60% loads then, and once the airline says, you know what, we're done with that, that's gonna change too. Because they can't make a lot of money on 60% loads.
No, but it'd be great if they just offered, hey, if you want this, you just buy this extra seat. Maybe at a discounted rate or something. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay. Anything else? Now, public comment. Hearing none, 9:38, meeting adjourned.